Now, I think although the G8 summit is, as I was saying just now, going to be at Camp David rather than here, I think the two do need to be seen in something of the same context. Both, of course, are going to be held under United States chairmanship, so both will therefore be, of course, a huge success. But there's also a common theme. Both institutions, the G8 and NATO, are addressing continual change in the outside world and within themselves and need to face up to those challenges. The two began with very different purposes, one economic, the other about security, but both have evolved over time to share a surprising number of the same priorities. And I'll try and say a little bit about what I mean by that. NATO, of course, was formed to provide collective security against the Soviet Union after the Second World War. In the years immediately prior to the adoption of the treaty, the West had seen the Soviets flex their muscles across Europe. They had supported communist insurgents in the Greek Civil War, backed the coup in Czechoslovakia, and in perhaps the most worrying sign, blockaded Berlin, which was an existential threat to the stability of post-war Europe, if not of Western civilization. And in response to all that, the free nations of Europe and North America came together to reaffirm their commitment to and support of each other. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty, Article 5 in particular, was one of the first and best assertions of the importance of collective security, the notion that an attack against one is an attack against all. Security is only one part of a successful and stable society, so prosperity and economic stability matter too, and that's where the G8 comes into the equation. Collaboration amongst the world's major economies began in response to the global oil crisis of 1973. The first summit of the G6, as it then was a reflection of a common belief in the need for international cooperation on economic issues. As other countries emerged, not just as economic powers, but as winning, proactive partners in the global system of trade and free markets, the G6 welcomed them in, expanding to the membership that we now have of 8 members. So the original purpose of NATO and the G8 may have evolved, but the institutions remain, as does their grounding, in a Western set of values rooted in democracy and liberal economics. They remain fit for purpose to face up to the challenges today. For NATO members, obviously the Soviet Union is no more. The threat to nations of Europe and North America is not, therefore, from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, from a defined state actor with clear borders and territorial ambitions, or from their diplomats or their standing army. Instead, what we're facing up to is a global, asymmetric threat from enemies who live and fight in the shadows. So our shared defense now takes a different form. It's less about battle lines, tanks, air bases, air-to-air combat, more about information, intelligence, the ability to respond rapidly as new threats emerge. This includes the ability and willingness to project power to the source of those new threats. No single country these days can stand guard alone when everybody is a potential target. This makes international cooperation and collective security all the more important. Similarly, turning back to the G8 for a moment, that organization, that group of countries, is no longer the place where all the world's economic decisions are made. The original G6 was the driver of the entire world's economic system, but growth over the last few decades has brought new economies into the mix. From 1997 to 2007, those G6 countries saw GDP growth of 1 or 2%, but outside, other growth was much faster. In Russia, 5.7%, China almost 10%, India 7%. And the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 showed that we needed to meet at heads of government level in a much bigger group if we were going to face up to the challenges which that crisis threw up. So as a result, we've now got decision-making shifting much more to the group of G20, which we think is a good thing. It reflects the growth and spread of global prosperity and ultimately can lift tens of thousands of people out of poverty if properly handled. When the G20 was started, the main question was what would become of the G8? What was its purpose anymore? The G8, as we see it today, is actually answering that question in a positive manner. It's the place where leaders come together to share ideas more informally than they can in other venues. And I think that is why President Obama has taken the decision to take people up in very small delegations to Camp David rather than to put them in a great big conference centre where the risk is that the exchanges remain too institutionalized. It's the group now that sets an example. We may no longer be driving the direction of the global economy by sheer size, although in fact the G8 countries are still extremely important in that context, but this is also now the home of innovation, of new policies, of fresh thinking, and we put ourselves on the forefront to show the rest of the world what can be done and to spread some new thinking. And the G8 has also moved beyond just economic issues like finance and trade and is taking leadership on global development, building democratic capacity, climate change, and other big issues.